Good afternoon, everyone. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. We're going to let some people have time to join and get their audio all set. Okay, I think we have slowed down in participants, so I think we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Emily Dittman, and I am the Associate Director of the Syracuse University Art Museum. We thank you for joining for a conversation today between Museum Curator Melissa Ewan and Purse Sisters and co-organizers of the current exhibition on display in the museum, Purse Sister Incarcerated Women in Louisiana, Dolphinette Martin and Sarita Stibe. Before we begin our program today, I would like to acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people on whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. I would like to also acknowledge James White for his continuing support for the museum exhibitions and special programs, as well as the Syracuse University Humanities Center, who are co-sponsoring this afternoon's event. As we get started this afternoon, a few housekeeping notes. This is a Zoom meeting format, and we ask that you mute your microphones during the initial conversation. We will open the conversation up to the larger community after the initial talk and invite you to please turn on your cameras and join us for a larger conversation. If you'd like be more comfortable adding comments or questions to the chat, I will be monitoring it and will ask on your behalf. Please note that this presentation is being recorded, so if you feel more comfortable with your cameras off, that is perfectly fine if you would not like to be on video. We are pleased to also provide closed captioning during this program. If you would like to view the closed captionings, click the CC Live transcript button in the toolbar and select Show Subtitle. The exhibition Purse Sister presents the personal and intimate stories in their own voices and own terms of 30 women who persist in their drive for integral survival of their mind, body, and soul. Dolphinette and Sarita, in addition to being co-organizers of the exhibition, also are Purse Sisters whose stories are illustrated through the artwork on display. Their stories come to life through the pairing of a purse sister and an artist who created a work inspired by her story. Other stories take the shape of voice recordings or handwritten messages, all with the intention of challenging misconceptions and uninformed assumptions. By building awareness of the situations arising before, during, and after incarceration, this exhibition seeks to find common ground and pathways for society to empathically move forward together. One step in this goal are conversations such as the one we are about to have. Please join me as we listen to their conversation.
Thank you, Emily. I'm so thrilled to join you all today, and I would like to welcome Dolphinette and Sarita, who is zooming in from, I imagine, Louisiana. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome both of you to this virtual Syracuse University space. And let's get started. So I would like to first talk a little bit about the exhibition as a whole and to give an overview of it. So to begin, this exhibition is a collaboration between the Newcomb Art Museum at Tulane University and the two of you. Can you talk briefly about how this partnership came about?
Yeah, I'm still trying to navigate between this mute and unmute, so I apologize. I'm gonna be a little slow. And if I start talking before it's unmuted, y'all please tell me. Absolutely. I just want to say thank you, Melissa, for having us here today. And we appreciate just being able to be in conversation with you guys. The partnership came to fruition. There were multiple meetings that Tulane Newcomb Art Museum held and were looking for people in the community to inform them about what type of exhibit that should be in the museum inside of their community. And there were all kinds of ideas. You know, we were invited to come to the table and we continued to be at the table. And what came out of all of those meetings over a period of about 2 years was an understanding that we should be talking about the incarceration of women in Louisiana. And it started around conversations about mass incarceration, and Louisiana being the state that incarcerated the most people per capita than anywhere in the world. And it began to think about and talk about, what did that actually mean? And what we realized was that when people thought about mass incarceration, they were always thinking about men, talking about the incarceration of men, but women never came up in the conversation. So we decided that it was a great time to bring women into the conversation and begin to frame this exhibit around the history of incarceration in the state of Louisiana as a whole. What did that mean, for women? And then also just identifying and figuring out together what the drivers of incarceration were for women. So that is how the partnership came to be. We often joke now, years later, that it took 2 years for us to figure out how to work together. The museum came kicking and screaming, and we were in the community fussing about, you're going to do this and we need to do that. So it took us about 2 years to get to a point where we really understood what needed to happen and how we should proceed forward. And, now it's been like one of the best experiences of, our lives.
Yeah, and last week we heard from Monica Ramirez Montague, the then director at the Newcomb and the current director at the Broad Art Museum at Michigan State. And she talked a little bit about the challenges that the museum experienced in this planning process. And that talk is available on the Syracuse University Art Museum's YouTube page, by the way. And she also talked a little bit about how this is such an innovative project for an art museum to take on in this kind of community engagement. And I'd like to hear from both of you and your experience in working on this project. Like, what drew you to this to begin with? And what about an art museum really allows you to tell these stories?
Well, I'll jump in here. So what actually drew Sarita and myself to work with Tulane around this exhibition was the fact that they were trying to create something that told our stories, right? And so to tell our stories had to come from us. It had to come from women like us. It had to come from our community. It had to come from our lived experiences. And so the other piece of that was, this was a huge opportunity because historically, and if I could just talk transparently, Tulane University itself had been kind of like a forbidden space for people that came from my community, which was, the lower income, the poverty-stricken communities. And though we're surrounded by the university is surrounded by our communities, it was literally, as I said, historically taboo to even go along that corridor. So for them to be coming to us and asking us to be a part of this was absolutely yes. But also, Sarita and I, as the years has gone on, we've become more, if I may, Sarita, polished. It was like either we're going to be a part of it or it's not going to happen. And so that partnership, as Sarita said, it took us about 2 years, but working with Monica on this project was, as she said, like one of the best experiences that to date that I've had with working with system, if I could.
Mm-hmm.
And I just would like to add in really quickly, just to emphasize the point that Dolphin had made about the university being inaccessible to the communities that were directly around it. The other portion of that is like traditionally Tulane had a bad reputation in the community. The university was built on the backs of people of color, but people of color were not allowed to have an education at the institution. And I remember really early on when I first started Operation Restoration, we were hosting a women's first clinic, and our first space that we had was in the top of this church. It was on the second floor of this historical church in the New Orleans community that had been in the community for over 100 years. It was called Pilgrim's Rest #2 Baptist Church on the middle of Louisiana Avenue. I was a member of the church, and the pastor was like, you definitely can utilize this space to teach the classes. And when the elders of the church, there were two gentlemen who were in their 90s. They were, elders in the church. We showed up at school one day to have class, and the doors were locked, and they had put us out. And their fear was that Tulane was going to come in and steal their building. And nothing that I could say, nothing that I could talk about could assure them that Tulane was not going to come and steal their building. So I think to go from that to being able to pull off this exhibit was monumental in that sense, because community had traditionally not been consulted. Community did not have access to the museum or the campus as a whole. So I think the reason that it also took us 2 years is that honestly, my background is not in co-curating at an art museum. And, Monica's background is not in being a formerly incarcerated woman. So there were just a lot of things that we had to work through. What was fair compensation, what should have been going on, how we should handle certain things. We had to talk about language. We had to make sure that the exhibit in the way that it was set up was not triggering for formerly incarcerated women. And if it was triggering, like what supports are we going to put in place for those things? So by the time we executed, the exhibit as a whole, we were pretty good at saying, hey, the art thing, that's your expertise. I'm gonna let you do that. And then Monica was like, hey, Sarita, y'all got to take this one. So we were really comfortable with allowing each other to curate in a way that was comfortable for us, based on our expertise.
That sounds like such a wonderful partnership and such a fruitful process of co-creation. And the exhibition is really a testament to not only the trust that you all have built among this team, but also the creativity that we can see on view as well. Before we really continue and dive a little deeper into the exhibition's content, I would like to pause on the exhibition's title and the first part of the title in particular, Persister. How did that portion of the title come to be, and what meaning does it hold for each of you?
Yeah, well, it was Monica's idea. I have to give credit where credit is due. And her thought was, after like hearing all of the interviews and meeting with all of the women and everyone who was involved, she said that a theme kept coming up for her about the women being persistent, and persistence. It just kept coming up for her. And she was like, we're talking about women and their persistence, and we all call each other sisters. So when we meet each other and we've been incarcerated, it's like, this is my sister, from the struggle. This is my sister from another mother. This is my sister. So she was like, oh my God, like persistence and sisters. So let's do a play on the word persist and make it persister. So saying that all of these women are persisters, if you're speaking about it together, but also given the individuality by carving out the word per and highlighting the word sister. So that is how it was thought about, and that is how it came to be.
And I really love how, like, you brought up the punctuation, kind of carving out the per. So we hear from each individual woman, but then it also again underscores this community that has been built and the trust that you all have cultivated over all of these years. That is one of the most compelling parts. And one of the parts that really drew me into this exhibition. And it was a really great entry to the 4 sections of the exhibition. And just very briefly, the 4 sections of the exhibition. The first really examines the root causes of women's incarceration. The second examines the social impact of long-term incarcerated mothers. The third delves into the psychological and physical toll of incarceration. And the final section considers the challenges and opportunities of reentry for formerly incarcerated women. And across these 4 sections, as Emily has briefly mentioned in our introduction, 30 artists worked in a variety of media, painting, sculpture, music, poetry, to create their interpretations of the persisters' lived experiences. And now I would like to briefly turn our attention to the works inspired by Sarita's and Dauphinette's stories. And if I could share my screen briefly so we can all see the works. And let me make this a full screen. There we go. So what I have on the screen here is Anastasia Pelias's painting Star for Sarita. And so Sarita, I have a few questions for you. First, can you talk a little bit about the process of creating this work? And how did you get to know Anastasia? Did you get to decide to work with her?
So this is a story that people, find unbelievable, and you'll be able to hear from Dauphinette's process just how different people are. But they gave us these catalogs of works from different artists, and they said they wanted us to look through the different works and like pick an artist that spoke to you and the type of art that they do, the type of colors that they may use, whether it's abstract or still, just whatever. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, yeah, that's so not me. Like, I'm not looking at this catalog. I don't really care about any of that. Like, I want to meet people. So we also had a series of like brunches where we were able to go in and introduce ourselves and meet the artists and begin a fellowship. And Anastasia stood up and she introduced herself and she was like, this white woman with blonde hair. She was so awkward and just all over the place and like giggly. And she had like amazing energy. And I was like, yep, that's who I want to do my painting. And everybody was like, well, how did you choose her? I was like, oh, her energy, and everybody just thought I was nuts. And Anastasia had been reading about me and wanting to work with me, but I didn't know that at the time. And it was just, I felt like it was, a perfect kismet of like energies. And we met and, I picked her because she was like who she was, and how she presented. But the process was Anastasia, of course, all of the persisters, myself included, were interviewed about our story and we were all asked the same questions. And the artists had access to those interviews. So they were able to listen to them. But then Anastasia would reach out and she was like, Sarita, like, what kind of music did you listen to when you were incarcerated? So I gave her like this whole playlist of songs. And one song in particular by Kelly Price, it's called There's Something That You Must Know. And I was like, Anastasia, this was like my favorite song. I used to listen to this over and over. She didn't even know who Kelly Price was at the time. But now every time she hears Kelly Price on the radio, she texts me. She's like, our girl is on the radio, but she listened to my playlist while creating the piece. And the piece is actually a rather large piece. It's my wingspan. So she had me come into the studio and she's like, let me measure your wingspan. And she was just having all of these crazy requests and I was along for the ride. And what she created was this painting out of all of that. And I couldn't be more proud and happy about what she created.
And really looking at the painting, it reminds me of so many things. It reminds me of a flower, a star, or like even these elements right here, they also remind me of wings. So I wonder what associations do all of these, what do you think of when you see this painting?
So the first thing I saw when I walked in was like, oh my God, did she put a uterus on the painting? Because I thought it was like females, female parts. But then when I began to look and really like look at the colors and the way that she shaded things in and, like the subtleties of, like you said, the wings or the flower petals. And, it's like every time I look at it, I feel like I discover something new, even like, in the song with Kelly Price, it talks about rain in the song, and even like it looks like someone's crying, and that could be rain, so it's just so many things that I think are incorporated into the painting that I really just, I'm excited every time that I see it, but that was my first thought. I was like, she put a uterus in my painting, like that's badass, because everything about me is like female, and I was like, this is perfect, when I walked in.
That's amazing. And I have to add that here at SU, we've installed this painting near the start of the exhibition across from a wall of photographs of all of the persisters. And to me, it was a very deliberate choice because in a way, I see you and Dolphinette and your work at Operation Restoration as, in a way, the guiding stars are really like that the angels leading the way. So I thought that was appropriate to highlight. So let us now turn to the work that Carl Joe Williams did, inspired by the story of Dolphinette. And again, Dolphinette, I'll pose the same questions to you. Can you talk a little bit about the process of creating this work? And did you get to select which artists you'd work with?
Sure, absolutely. Kind of sort of similar story. As Sarita said, we were given these catalogs to look through, and we were told to like pick three. You had your first, second, third choice. The colors in most of Carl's paintings were just vibrant and bright like this, and really caught my attention. But more than anything, just the fact that he was an African-American male with this kind of talent kind of stood out to me, because again, Sarita and I come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. However, we ended up both same place, incarceration due to trauma. And so, I looked over the catalog, I picked three, but I kept coming back to this one. And I remember we were at a brunch, same brunch that Sarita met Anastasia, and Monica came up to me and I said, I think I found who I wanted. She said, well, before you make your decision, there's this person, he really wants to meet you, Dolphinette. Ironically, it was Carl. And it was like, as Sarita said, it was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
I had chosen him and he had chosen me, and we worked through this piece. And what I shared with Carl, you see here at the bottom where I'm upside down, where my story began with, as far as back as I can remember, trauma and turmoil, and, the clocks that you see was time had passed, and I was, you see broken glasses, and that's times and periods in my life where I was just broken. And the end result was this piece where I'm right side up, I'm whole, I'm vibrant, and I'm living. The other side of that is that the majority of the trauma that I shared with him, deeply rooted in Black men. So he took that pain and created this beautiful piece. Ironically, a Black man.
I just also want to add that Dolphinette left out a piece about the TV. So it was like amazing to like see her interview in the front on the TV playing at the same time that you're watching her. So you could actually hear her voice to like tie everything together. And then the other thing, we were standing in front of her painting because she and I got to walk through it together for the opening, for the first time, to see like how everything came together. And do you know that this thing was blinking its eyes at me? I was like, Dolphinette, this is amazing. So just the detail and the thought and the care that he put into, creating this amazing work of art, just, it's just an amazing piece.
I also will be remiss, these little blocks here are pictures of women. Though I don't know any of them, I know them all. They are me, and I am them.
Yeah, Dolphinette and Sarita, I'm really glad you brought up the TV, because yes, standing in front of this work, we get to hear from you, Dolphinette, like in the video, but also the blinking. So there's, if I can kind of reveal the secret behind this work a little, there is actually a TV screen embedded in this upper right portion of the work. And so Dolphinette's eyes are blinking like on the TV screen. So, and again, it also activates this work, and it really reminds us that, Dolphinette, you are a person and you have, your stories to share with all of us. And that really kind of reminds us of the power of storytelling that this exhibition really does underscore. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Oh, before we move away from talking specifically about these works, Dolphinette, can you describe briefly how it felt to see this work in person? I imagine you didn't see a uterus or anything like Sarita did in hers.
No, not quite. But it was breathtaking, because there wasn't like this moment where we would, we would get to see pieces of it as it was being created. So the first time I saw it was when everybody else saw it.
Mm-hmm.
And as Sarita said, her and I, we led the tour, and we literally was seeing our piece at the same time as everyone else. And definitely when we saw the eyes blink, like it just took my breath. It made, as you said, it made me real. It made the piece human. It made me, and those who were there to see it, realize that these are people. These are not just women who went to jail for some crimes that they committed. These are human beings who had a story to tell.
Absolutely, and thank you for kind of underscoring and reinforcing that point. The last question I have about these works in particular, when I say these works, I mean the exhibition as a whole. What was it like seeing all of your persisters' stories visualized in this form? Like, what was it like seeing the totality of your work, like 4 years worth of work in the exhibition come together?
I think for me, it wasn't necessarily the works that were created, because all of these artists are like extremely super talented, and just the take on the stories were amazing. But I think the part that I enjoyed the most was watching the other women walk through and see themselves on the wall in a museum, and the thing that we kept hearing over and over from the women was that, this is one of the worst experiences of their lives. This is when they felt the ugliest. And to take all of this hurt, pain, lack of self-confidence, self-worth, and turn it into like this beautiful work of art, like to see the light in their eyes and the smiles on their faces. And, it was just amazing. But then to see that people were actually interested in it. So the first place that it traveled to right before COVID hit was in New York at the Ford Foundation Museum. And the Ford Foundation Museum flew her sisters up to the opening. And some of them, this is their first time in New York. And then they're in this museum in New York. And, all of these people are here to see them and their stories, and people are asking to speak to them and take pictures with them. And just, you could see the value that was given to these women in that moment. I think that was, or is, the best thing about this exhibit for me.
Absolutely the same for me. Absolutely the same. To be there with our sisters, we were all there together. And as Sarita said, some being their first time in New York, and just being there together, we were family. And I have to say, it was like there was no expense, spared. There wasn't the doubled in the rooms, and they made sure that the women felt that they deserved to, one, be flown to New York, two, be in this exhibition. People come to see you, to hear you, to meet you, but also enjoy your stay here, feel comfortable and confident, something that we don't always feel. Even when we get to the place, and as humbly as I can, of professionalism that Sarita and I have gotten to, there's not always that confidence that you feel. There are days where you drift back into that, do I deserve this? So for us all to be there together, we held each other up, we cried, we laughed, we ate, we went to the mall, we walked up the streets of New York, and we were just women enjoying each other.
And the last thing that I just want to add really quickly was like, the experience in New Orleans was the same for myself and Dauphinette, as people decided to come in, and then we got to meet Mr. Bunch, who runs the Smithsonian Museum in DC, the African American Smithsonian. I'm sorry, y'all, my accent was getting the best of me just now. But museum in DC, and we got to take people on tours and all of this, and just to even know that this exhibit was the most visited exhibit in the history of the Newcomb Art Museum, I think even also just underscored how much of a change that the museum was willing to make, and the focus that they wanted to have, and just also being able to make it accessible to community, I think also made the women feel really good, because they were able to invite like their families in for the opening and to see this exhibit take place, and then for it to be there for 7 months, and people were like sad it was ending. They were trying to see if they needed to extend it, and then now the show is traveling, so I think that I just wanted to highlight that part as well.
Yeah, and Sarita, I'm glad you highlighted that part, because for so many, the art museum is a scary place that there's a level of presupposed knowledge, or there's a presupposed level of kind of a whole variety of presuppositions that one may or may need to kind of enter into that space, and to really work to break down those barriers, and to kind of, like you said, highlight the accessibility of not only the content, but also to really tell these stories that traditionally have not been told in an art museum. From a museum's perspective, it's so important that this partnership was formed, and that we have this exhibition to tell all of these stories. And I wonder, kind of hearing your responses and your story so far, has this partnership changed your relationship to art and to the art museum?
I don't know if it's necessarily changed my relationship with the art museum. As Dauphinette alluded to before, we grew up in like different socioeconomic backgrounds. When I went to prison, my mom was a judge. So, I've had an opportunity to travel as a child, and, as an adult, my mom took us to museums, the Louvre, just different places. So I was really well acquainted with art, in the sense of, I think that I am a lover of paintings and photography and beautiful things, but not really understanding art on a level of, this is good art, this is great art, or, this is the standard, these are the things that should happen. So I think that I had some experience, but it still did not prepare me for the things that we had to address as we were working through the exhibit, and just really understanding that all systems, even though we think they're creative, or we think that they're punitive, or we think that they're educational or health related systems, they were all built, by the same folks, a long time before any of us were here. and they were all built for a particular type of person or individual, which we all know as white men. And when you are involved in systems that were created, for that purpose, that is how things are, compared to, and like the gold standards are created and all of those things. And it's just how it happens. So still being able to understand that things were never created for inclusivity, for women, for people of color, for anyone other than who those things were created from. And then to work in the confines of that to say, hey, I want to bring my creativity to this space, but how will it be recognized if we're all judged, by this system? So I think that for me, that was the most shocking thing. It's like, shucks, the same things that I'm fighting, in the nonprofit world, in the social justice world, actually, exist in the art world. I knew they existed in academia. I knew that they existed in the hospital because I worked in the hospital prior to starting a nonprofit. And, I'm very involved in higher education, but it was like, I didn't think that it existed in art too, So just really understanding the connectivity of everything was really eye-opening for me, and really just reinforcing the need to like press upon, different cultures and different disciplines to become more inclusive.
Yeah, so for me, Melissa, the only introduction I had ever had to art was, when we took our little school field trips, so no, had no clue what art really was. If I could be honest, I didn't realize until we worked on this project that music is a form of art. Art to me meant visual, right? That's how much I knew. But in working on this particular project, I became exposed to, as Sarita said, the different types of art, the different different styles of artists. And I was very intrigued to learn more each time. We visited, we went to the opening, but there were times where we went back again and again and again to the exhibition. And each time there was something else that I learned. There was something else that I saw. There was something else that just intrigued me about the exhibition itself. And I was there from beginning to end, but never really got to take it all in. And though I went several times, I still have not taken it all in.
And I think that is, in a way, the power of art, where it can not only allow for these stories to be told, but this repeated returning to and really kind of looking at a work and really kind of gleaning different aspects from the same work as we return to it. I have one last question I would like to pose to the both of you before we open it up for a larger conversation. And that is, what are some of the ideas or issues that you would like the Syracuse University audience to take with them after viewing this exhibition?
Well, I'll start. I think that what I hope that people would take away initially was like, I wanted them to understand that women who were incarcerated were people, that the language that they use matters, that, these women shouldn't be forgot about or, loved on or thought of any less. Like I had all of these millions of things that I wanted people to come in here and know about, like formerly incarcerated women. But I think after and in hindsight, like the thing that I continue for people to, I hope for people to do is like learn, be interested, and be inspired to tackle whatever issue it is that they feel like they want to take on or lead, because it was, for some of the women, this is the most hardest thing that they had to do, confront their past, be vulnerable and share, so I think that what I thought in the beginning, because I'm always coming from the frame of being really protective of the women, transferred into like that larger big picture of, education, change, and inspiration, is what I hope for folks when they walk out.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with Sarita, but I posed this question to you, Melissa, because it's always something that I want to know. So for me, I know, most folks that I spoke with when they went to the exhibition the first time, like the idea that they had going in was not the same when they came out, right? Because, I watch a lot of TV and I'm sure others do. And so, what we see on ID and, Lifetime, and that's the idea that people have around women who's gone to prison, right? But really wanting people to understand the root causes of women and incarceration. What led us there, right? And, I remember, and I think you could recall this, Sarita, did a piece with the New York Times, somewhere I had did a piece. And I remember speaking about, myself, woman, single parent, 5 children, 10 convictions, and having someone comment. And I remember Sarita told me this afterwards, stuff, and that never read the comments. And I remember this guy saying, his comment was, I should have been sterilized, right? And I thought about that. And for me, I could not understand what would make someone say something so hateful. And it goes back to what Sarita said, uninformed, uneducated. He just saw, I have 10 convictions. But what he didn't see was, for years, I struggled, mental health, raising kids on my own, not even knowing how to be a parent, right? Not understanding that education was accessible to me. Sarita's mind was blown when I told her at 40 years old, inside of a prison, I was told that I could go to college. I never knew that. Never knew it. I thought that if you looked like me, you had to come from a family of 2, and that your family had to have some kind of income to put you through college. 40 years old. But when I learned that at 42, I went to college. At 45, I graduated, right? But understanding going in that what you perceive us to be aren't what we are. And hopefully when they come out of that exhibition, they realize that we're human beings that had some rough spots along the way, but we persisted, we kept coming, we kept going, and we're here. This is our real, true story. As good or as ugly as it may be, it's ours.
Thank you for sharing your powerful story, Dolphinette. And instead of a formal conclusion to this conversation, I would first invite everyone to please visit the Syracuse University Art Museum and to see each of the Persister stories on view in the galleries. And as instead of a formal conclusion, in our conversation last week, Dolphinette, you actually raised a really interesting question about visitors and the exhibition. And so could I ask you to pose that question to our audience today to jumpstart the Q&A portion of this event?
Sure. It actually touches on what I just said. I asked Melissa, what type of feedback, if any, has she gotten? Because I'm sure, folks went into the exhibition saying, okay, I'm going to see these 30 women who are in prison, that mind frame. But when you walk through, and if you got a chance to really take in the exhibition and the stories and the women and humanize us, what was your mindset when you left that exhibition versus when you went in?
I would like to invite our audience members to, if you would like to turn your cameras on, unmute yourselves, and share some of your experiences with both Dolphinette and Sarita and the rest of the audience today.
Well, I can start actually, because I was in the conversation last week with the three of them as we planned for this program. And one of my answers was, I witnessed a lot of students, a lot of community members, new faces. We've had so many new faces in the museum. And I've seen them really staying at the pieces much longer than they normally would at normal exhibitions. They're reading the captions, they're listening to the audios, but they're also leaving and coming back, which I haven't noticed before. They're coming, they're approaching it, they're absorbing it, but then they have to leave and then come back to take more stories and to listen to them. So they're taking their time with this exhibition, which I think that a lot of times, even I do in other museum galleries, walk past it. So I think that that's an impact that is a really successful and empowering impact of this exhibition. Hopefully you do feel that way as well. And then another thing that I'll just share is we set up a room that actually Sierra and Miriam at the Tulane suggested, and it was part of what they had done in their original one, of sort of like a decompression or a space where you could have sensory, we have some lavender satchels in there. And we also put some cards down for people to write responses or some sketchbooks. And people have left some notes, and some of them most overwhelmingly are notes to each other about, this is, I feel lonely, this is a struggle, there's students or community. But then there's also notes back to those students or to the community members and says, I see you, I'm lonely too, it's okay. So there's that sort of reaction that's coming through this exhibition as well.
Yeah, for me, yes, I was struck by the individual stories of the persisters, but thinking about the totality of all 30 of them, for me, it really drives home the inequities in the systems that Sarita was talking about, and how these systems really inform every aspect of our lives, and really thinking about the inequities and how people of color have to really navigate these inequities and how they shape so many of our experiences.
So if I could kind of, I'm not sure if I was clear. So for clarity, I'll give you all a little brief story of something that happened to Sarita and I during one of the exhibitions. There was some real important people that came to New Orleans and went through the exhibition. And I remember standing outside as they were coming in. You remember this, Sarita? And they each passed me like I wasn't even there, right? Never knowing I'm one of the people you're going to see and you're coming to meet. And I remember out of about 30 people, only 3 of them took the time to say hello to me as they walked past me on the sidewalk. So once the show started, we go in and, we had the whole exhibition, and, some of these same people wanted to take pictures with me, and they wanted to. And so at the end, I asked those 3 people who took the time out to just see me and speak to me to come up. And, I have to say, Mr. Bunch was one of the people that spoke to me. And they were like, he's on the phone. And I'm like, get him in here, right? And they were like, oh, God, she's getting Mr. Bunch. And yeah, tell him, come on in here. And so there was this Mr. Bunch, this Black man. There was one white woman. And then there was another guy who was actually like the leader of the group. There were only 3 that spoke to me. There were only 3 that saw me. And when I told them that story and what that felt like, there was a lot of shame. There was a lot of apologies. There was a lot of guilt. And what I asked them to do was to sit in that, because that is what led 30 women to prison. That, not being seen, not being heard, not feeling valued. But then when you recognized me as somebody, the energy shifted. Why? I'm the same person that was on the sidewalk. You just didn't know who I was when you passed me.
So what was school like for you? So school must have been terrible. I mean, you weren't acknowledged as the beautiful person you are. And
if I'm honest, school was easy for me. And I think that's what caused me to stop. My mom was single. She didn't have the time to come to the award ceremonies and to, I always was academically enhanced, always got awards, but my mom couldn't not work to come there. And so for me, it must not have been important. So I lost interest in it.
Wow.
But again, in my community, I didn't see that. I didn't see people going to college. I didn't see it. So I didn't think it was accessible to me.
And I think, like, just to give a little bit more background, like, as someone who education was like everything in my household and it was important, and my mom and my dad made sure that we were involved in education, I didn't even know that people like Dauphinette didn't know that college was accessible to Black folks. So when me and Dauphinette had a conversation, she said to me, well, the only people that I knew who went to college was the Huxtables on TV. And their mom was a lawyer and dad was a doctor. They lived in the house with both parents in New York. And here I am, a Black girl in the project, the Cali Oak Project in New Orleans, and no one that I know has that experience. So that is why I thought that I could not go to college. And no one in the school system, which in Louisiana is something that we are still fighting now today with the public school system, specifically in New Orleans, being 100% charter and no consistency, is that one of her teachers who saw how academically enhanced she was, never said, let me pull this child to the side and make sure that she gets to college, So I think that we have this concept of like basing educational experiences on our experience or what we know that should happen. And I was guilty myself, and when I designed this organization and I was like, okay, I want to make sure that people get their high school equivalency and that they go to college. And I want to make sure that they have clothes and hygiene to do so. And then I meet somebody like Dauphinette and she's suffering with housing insecurity. She don't care about going to school if she doesn't have anywhere to live or nothing to eat. So we started thinking about adding programs into the organization. Hence, we have 15 programs now, because even though that I feel like education is the key to a successful reentry and changing the trajectory of one's life, you can't even focus on the education if you don't have something to eat, you don't have childcare, you don't have transportation, you don't have a safe place to live. And those things are things that when you grow up with those things, or you grow up in an area where you have access to a good school, that you take for granted. And we think that this is available everywhere, even 5 miles down the street.
Wow. Thank you.
And if y'all want to ask any questions, I know Melissa kind of like framed it or whatever, because I know that some of you all may not have had an opportunity to see the exhibit yet, but if there are any questions that you all want to ask or engage in conversation with, we're open to that as well. I tell people all the time, I don't care what you ask me.
At all.
Well,
And this is a safe space. If you're, this is just a safe space, to be honest. If the stigma around incarceration was your ideal when you went in, it's okay.
Well, I'm so proud of Syracuse that they brought this up there. It's probably Vanya Malloy, the director. I'm so thrilled that she brought this. I live in New York City, so I could have seen it at the Ford. I didn't even know the Ford Foundation had a museum, so I would want to keep in touch with them now. But I had one other question, and since I didn't know if it was right for now, but you both said something that you were incarcerated because of Trump, I think. Is that what you said? Oh, no, you didn't say that.
Trauma.
Oh, okay. Oh, trauma. So incarcerated because of trauma. So can you explain that? Like trauma just in your life, so it puts you in these wrong situations, or trauma, in what way do you mean that?
So I'll give you a little mine, and Sarita's is completely different, but it's trauma.
Oh, dear.
So for me, single parent, my mom working all the time, me and my sister, and there's no mail there. I'm living in the most notorious housing project in Louisiana as a young girl, looking for somebody to protect me, right? And so absolutely, I'm looking for the roughest, toughest guy there is out there.
Oh,
right? And because there's no male figure there for me, there's nobody there.
okay.
And that leads me into a life of abuse and drug use and all of the secrets from my childhood. I'm just looking for somewhere to belong.
Okay.
And that trauma led me straight to prison.
As Dolphinette says, ours is different, but there are 95% of women who are incarcerated have a history of some type of reported abuse. And what we often say is the other 5, it just wasn't reported. But the commonality of people that are in prison is that we've all had some type of abusive situation that you have been a part of that led to trauma. So for me, it was physical abuse inside my household. My mom was a very important figure. My dad was successful, and it was relationship issues that spilled over to kids, and so physical abuse was present in my household, and not having anybody to talk to about it, because in Black families specifically, what goes on in your home stays in your home. You don't talk about it, you don't seek help. I'm thankful that my mom wanted and sent me to counseling, but for me, by the time I was diagnosed with PTSD by the age of 14, because of things that were experienced in the home, I don't know, I was like a master manipulator. I also was very intelligent in school, never had to study, graduated number 10 in my class, had a full scholarship to Xavier in physics and engineering. just had all of these different experiences. I went to the military. I mean, just like everything you could think of. But when someone would sit me on the couch, in my mind, it would be like, let me see how long it's going to take for them to tell me all of their problems. And I could quickly flip, the situation, because I grew up as a little adult. Like my mom, who was very successful, struggled with certain things needing to be taken care of. So I'm like this little 10-year-old person taking care of household things, my sibling, my cousins next door, just having to grow up really fast and not being able to focus on, my own mental health. So by the time I went to prison at 19, I was sentenced to 20 years. I'm in state prison, 10 years in federal prison. But by the time I was 19, it was so far gone that I couldn't even receive help if it was given to me, because I was so used to taking care of myself. And I mean, if I'm honest, I thought I was smarter than everybody, which intelligence-wise I was, but that didn't serve a purpose at that time because I couldn't receive help. And I wasn't smart enough to know that I still needed to learn every single day of my life. I thought I had it figured out, And as often as, it put me in situations where I was sexually assaulted at 16. I, just had all of these different experiences that were traumatic, throughout my life. And, that's the one commonality, no matter where you come from, who you are, if you don't deal with your trauma and your issues, they're going to show up, in multiple ways. And like a lot of the things that Dolphinette and I fight against is like, there's this talk about violent crime versus nonviolent crime. And it was very important for us to like showcase all types in our exhibit, because if you are someone who's suffering from trauma or whatever, it's not like the left side of your brain has a conversation with the right side of your brain and it says, hey, when your trauma shows up today, we're going to do that in a violent or a nonviolent manner. It's not a choice. It just presents itself. And if we truly believe that, we are helping people and we want people to like have a new start and be able to start over, 95% of the people that are sentenced to prison are coming home, irrespective of the crime that they commit. So how do we focus on like not shunning them or excluding categories, or only these people are worthy of helping? If they went to prison for a drug conviction, we're going to help them. But if they went to prison for a violent crime, they're lost to society, So a lot of the work that we do is like in these conversations and just talk about like the realities of like what actually leads, someone to prison. And the last thing I'll say is like, that's why it's so important for us to like focus on language. I often tell people that, for 10 years, I didn't hear my first name. So the pronunciation of Sarita is very important to me. When people say Sarita, it's important because when I was released from prison and someone would say Sarita, I didn't respond because I was called an inmate, or, my humanity was wiped away from me. So when we like reinforce these dehumanizing terms when we're speaking about people, when you call them an offender, or you call them an inmate, or you call them anything other than a person or by their name, all of that works together to erase humanity around a subgroup of people. And I think that people want to help people. People want to invest in people, but I might not necessarily want to help an inmate or a convict, or an offender, because that's a way to remove the humanity from this population. So that's why names are so important, and how you speak about people are so important. So, some things people say like, well, how do you talk about somebody, who went to jail? And I'm like, oh my God, just like that, a person who was in jail, a person who went to prison, a person who was arrested, a person who was involved in this. Like if you start with person-centered language when you're speaking about people, you stop seeing folks as this, I don't know, unicorn that's out in the universe that I don't know how to talk about them, or, it's not a human being, so that's a lot of the work that we do too with this exhibit.
And also understanding that, this whole narrative around second chances is just bullshit. My second chance was up years ago, right? I needed another chance. I have 10 felony shoplifting convictions, 10. Through all of that, not one time was access granted to me for something different. The moment it was, I flourished.
And then also with Dolphin, I'm gonna let y'all go, I promise. The other thing is Dolphin that, that struck me with her was, she was like, I was arrested 10 times for shoplifting and not one time did somebody ask me, why are you shoplifting?
Not
And she
once.
would have been able to say, I have 5 kids, they're hungry, I have a drug addiction, this, but not one time in all of the times where she arrested, someone say, why?
I hope it's okay. I just wanted to say quickly that I really appreciate you both hosting and being part of this conversation and all your work on this project. I've been working with Emily and we're hosting from the law school, which is where I work, a co-hosted event next week that's going to bring in students and folks from the community. We've got activists who are focused on criminal justice reform, a lot of our students who are really interested in these issues. And I'm just so appreciative of what the work that you're doing and what this brings to the conversation for law students who have a lot of time staring at books and need more of this kind of exposure to these issues. So thank you so much.
I want to say we do have a piece of legislation that we're supporting advocates on the ground in New York to push this year, is the ban the box legislation on college applications up in New York this year. We did it here in Louisiana. We made Louisiana the first state to pass this type of legislation, but we're working with some really awesome and amazing groups on the ground in New York, NYU Law School, and just a whole bunch of different folks, to get that law passed in New York this year. So if you all know of people that want to get involved or you want to support, please just, Melissa, can you send out the information of how to get in contact with us? And I definitely would put you guys in contact with Dieter, who is leading on the ground in New York. But yeah, I just thought about that when you said that, Lauren.
I will definitely follow up. Thank you.
Well, actually, on that point, on the Ban the Box campaign, some schools have done this voluntarily. And so a campaign several years ago got the entire SUNY system to ban the box. And individual schools, including Syracuse University, could, if they wanted to, ban the box at their own institution. And since you guys are giving voice and face to people who are incarcerated, and so people can see that you're not monsters, you're as intelligent and as engaged as any student that's sitting in a classroom at Syracuse University, they ought to welcome you with open arms rather than excluding you because of the criminal history box. So thank you for your faces and your voices. It is what will help bring an end to mass incarceration.
Thank you so much, Alan. Yeah, I'm so familiar with the work, with CUNY and the systems, and it's been amazing. I think my experience, why I ended up pushing for it to be legislated in the state of Louisiana, is when I applied to UNO, I was denied an opportunity to get in, and it was based on who the provost was at the time. So when we were doing the legislation in Louisiana, the new provost at UNO was like, man, I'm all for this, and it's at any given time, you can get a new system administrator who wants to say, we're going to put it back on the application, which I think, in the CUNY system, it'll be a hard fight to do that. Anybody come in to do that. But I think that, that's why it was so important. And then in Louisiana, not every school asked. Some schools didn't ask, they voluntarily took it off. And then some schools had 7 questions around it. I graduated from LSU Health and Science Center. My degree is in clinical laboratory science. And I went through an inquisition to get in. Like I literally had to sit at a table, with like 6 white people, men and women, who were like, what happened? What was going on? And it was like the most, I don't know, intense thing I had ever been a part of outside of the interrogation that I received on my way into prison, and I think that that's why exactly what you said is so important, to make sure that we get this thing legislated and that it's not subjective and people don't really have a choice, because, the day that I was sentenced, they didn't tell me I was going to be denied an education. They said, do your time, pay this fine, and you're free to go. And to figure out, once you're released, there are 5,868 barriers in the state of Louisiana for someone who is formerly incarcerated. Like nobody ever told me about that,
I would like to echo the thanks of Lauren and Alan. We are really grateful for Sarita and Dolphinette and their time today and for sharing their stories. I would also like to echo the thanks of the Syracuse University Art Museum Director, Vanya Malloy, who posted the following message in the chat. And she says, we are so honored to have the opportunity to present this exhibition at Syracuse. This exhibition is such an inspiration and demonstrates how museums can partner with communities to give voice to social causes. So thank you again, Dolphinette and Sarita, and we invite everyone to visit us at the museum to see these works and to hear their stories in person. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our future events, which can be found on the museum's website, museum.syr.edu.
Thank you all for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Here.